Be in Luke chapter 12 if you have your Bible today. If you have it, we'll be in Luke chapter 12. It's where we've been for the last few weeks. We've been talking about life. How many of you have played the board game of life? We've been using this as a constant illustration. You've played it, right? So there's one part of the game where now as a father of 3 kids, I kind of start hyperventilating. I know it's a game. I know it's kind of made up, and it doesn't have anything to do with the money. It's when you get to that part of the game where you're going to pass through this certain U-turn in the board game, and it's like every other space, there's a kid, you know? So like if you spin a bunch of ones, you're going to have like 8 children. And, you know, we actually, Leslie and I, when we were, you know, having children and we started, God was blessing us, we had the first one and everything was great, and we had the second one, and then we were both kind of like, I think that's probably enough. You know, two was a good number. We were more one child parents, I think, and so we got the second one, but it was great, and we were like, you know, now it's even, 1-on-1, but then, you know, maybe a year and a half after that, we started getting that itch, you know, like the kids are so cute, and you hold somebody else's baby, and they're like, look how cute they are, and you forget, don't you? You forget what it really means to have a baby, and so. You know, I was in my office one morning. Leslie and I have been talking about, you know, do we want to try for another kid? And, you know, we kind of go back and forth. And so I sit down and I'm going to prepare a message. I'm about to spend time with God and do some praying and then studying. And then my wife comes in, and she sometimes comes in my office, and I'm kind of in the zone. And she starts waving something in front of my face, like really close where I couldn't focus on it. And it's a pregnancy test. And we find out we're going to have a 3rd child. And I'm like, well, no need to pray about that anymore. You know, I guess, you know, we're going to have a 3rd child, and it's been great. And now we've really, really lost our minds. We're about to have a 4th child. We're adopting a daughter from China. But, you know, it's kind of those unexpected things in life that freak us out, right? I mean, it's the unexpected things. It's the unexpected child. Or let me ask you this question. How many of you, and be honest, because there may be some of you, your life has turned out exactly the way you thought it would when you were 10 years younger? Anybody? So this is not exactly how you would have drawn it up? I mean, your life, your job, your family, and all those things, your marriage, don't be elbowing each other. I mean, life has unexpected things, doesn't it? And it's the unexpected things that they catch us by surprise, and they throw us for a loop. But I remember back in high school that my high school teacher actually taught me about life. He had this phrase that he would use all the time, and as a kid I really didn't understand it. But here he would often quote Benjamin Franklin, who wrote this: "Our new Constitution is now established and has an appearance that promises permanency, but in this world nothing can be said to be certain except death and taxes." Now, I was raised in church, so I knew all the scriptures about it's appointed unto man once to die. I got that part. But the taxes part, as a high school student, you don't think about that. You know, I mean, 2 things are certain, death and taxes. And so he would say that, and he'd be so proud of himself, like he'd have this smirk on his face, like, there's 2 certainties in this world, death and taxes. And I'd be like, I'd be sitting in the class like, y'all get it? And I'm thinking to myself, I don't get it. I don't get it. But he said there are 2 certainties in life. That everybody's going to die and you're going to pay taxes. And most of us would say amen to that, right? And most of us complain when we have to pay our taxes because we feel like we're paying too much for taxes. And so 2 certainties in life. But Jesus said that there's another certainty. And I want to explore that today in Luke chapter 12. So after warning his disciples, just kind of catch you up if you've been out for the last few weeks, he warned his disciples about some things in life. And the first one was covetousness. And then he talked to them about worrying. That covetousness really shows us that our desires for the wrong things. We don't need to be worrying about how much we have, because your life is not measured by how much you have. It's measured by who has you. Are you a child of God? And then he goes on to say, don't let worry invade your life, because worry it shows a lack of faith in God. It shows us that we're not really trusting God for every part of our lives. If we're constantly worried about money or relationships, it shows us that our focus is not really where it needs to be, because God is everything and can provide all that we need. So he says, don't be covetous, and then don't worry. Don't allow your life to be filled with worry. And then we looked at last week that the path of your life, where your life ends up, will be determined by what you treasure in your heart. Jesus said that where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So your heart and your life is going to follow the path of your treasure, your money, and the things that you really value in life. But Jesus then comes to this last teaching in Luke chapter 12, and he gives us a great principle for our lives, and I want you to remember it. It's very simple. It's simply this: a faithful life is a blessed life. Say that with me. A faithful life is a blessed life. Let's look at verse 35 as Jesus continues his teaching in Luke chapter 12. He said, "Stay dressed for action and keep your lamps burning, and be like men who are waiting for their master to come home from the wedding feast, so that they may open the door to him at once when he comes and knocks." Jesus begins in verse 35 by saying, "Stay dressed for action and keep your lamps burning." I'm going to tell you a little bit about my illustrious football career for a moment. So allow me for a moment on this day when the Texans are going to pound the Cowboys to gloat a little bit in my tremendous high school career. When I was a freshman, I was the second string quarterback. And the other guy that was in front of me, he was a much better athlete. I was not the fastest guy. I wasn't the strongest guy. I was much smaller then. But I was, we ran an option offense, which basically what that means is when you get the ball as a quarterback, you look at the defensive tackle and the defensive end, and you either hand the ball off to that running back if the hole is open. If not, you take it down the line, and then you have the option to pitch it. So we were playing the game. I forget who we were playing. I was just sitting on the sideline. I was a starting linebacker, but I was the backup quarterback. And so, I'm on the sideline kind of goofing off. And the defense kept getting on the field, kind of like the Texans, like 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out. And so, I was kind of getting tired. And the coach was livid. He was so mad at our quarterback. Well, our coach had this rule. Anytime you were on the sideline, you could not take your helmet off. So you had to have your helmet on at all times. And the reason was, if he called your name and you didn't have your helmet on, you were about to get your rear end chewed out. Because he wanted you at a moment's notice, at an injury, or if he was dissatisfied with someone's play, he wanted you to be ready to go into the game. He didn't want to call your name and you got to find your helmet and look around for everything, your mouthpiece, and then get in the game. And so I was standing on the sideline, and I was so close that day because I was tired. I was going to take my helmet off just to get some water. And all of a sudden, the coach called my name. He's like, "Pollard, get in there on offense." I was like, why? We already have a quarterback, right? And so I get in there. He wants me to run 119 veer, option to the right. And I remember the play. We're like at the 20-yard line, and I'm scared to death. My first snap as a quarterback in a game. I've done it at practice. And so I take the snap. I look at the defensive tackle. I read it. It's closed up. And so I'm running down the line, and I'm like tiptoeing, I feel like who's going to get me? Who's going to get me? And the defensive end, rather than coming and tackling me like he's supposed to, he goes after the running back thinking, this slow white dude is not going to make it, and he was right. And so I did a fake pitch, y'all. It was amazing. I faked the pitch to the running back. The linebacker, the cornerback, and the defensive end all broke on it. And, dude, I turned upfield, and there was nobody. And I ran as fast as these tree trunks could take me, man. And I'm telling you, I could hear them breathing as they're catching up to me. And all I was thinking was, just get to the end zone. And so I'm running slower than J.J. Watt down the field. I'm just running and running, and everything that I can. And right as I get to the goal line, the dude catches me. But I stretch the ball over the end zone. It's a touchdown. And I started every game at quarterback for the rest of my freshman year. And then I quit after that because I got hit by a big lineman. He gave me a concussion. So I was like, okay, I don't need that, all right? I don't need to lose my memory. But that was like my moment. And here's the thing. You never know. In my freshman year, I had no idea that my coach was going to put me in the game like that. I just figured I was going to be the linebacker. I wasn't really fast enough to be the quarterback. That's why I wasn't the starter. But if I had taken my helmet off and put it somewhere where it wasn't to be found and the coach called my name, perhaps I would have missed the opportunity that was afforded me by being placed into the game. When I was a firefighter for the city of Houston, when you get on a scene of a fire, they have what's called a RIT team. It's a rapid intervention team. And so what the RIT team's job is they are there on the scene only to rescue fallen firefighters. So in the fire department, you have a mayday signal if somebody gets trapped, and then they send the RIT team in, if it's safe enough, to go in, and their job is not to find civilians. Their job is to rescue fallen firefighters. So when you make the scene of a huge fire, you never know if you're going to be the first in to attack. But if you're on the RIT team and you're standing out there for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, you can ask Brother Hamilton. He was a firefighter. You're standing there, you're sweating inside your bunker gear, and everything inside of you just wants to kind of take a little bit off of your gear off, just to breathe a little bit and not be so hot. But what happens if a firefighter goes down in a fire and you're standing on the sideline and you're drinking water over there and you've got your mask off, you've taken all your bunker gear off? What happens to the firefighter that's inside? He's looking for you to rescue him, but you're not ready. So when Jesus said to his disciples, he said, you need to always be dressed for action. You need to always have your gear on. You need to have your helmet on. You need to be ready for something. Something that is certain. Not something that might happen, but something that will happen. He says to them to stay dressed for action and keep their lamps burning. So Jesus said, in life, we are to live in a constant state of readiness. Well, readiness for what? Notice what he says in verse 36. And be like men who are waiting for their master to come home from the wedding feast. So let me give you a little bit about Jewish weddings. A lot of times they would happen at night, and many times they would happen in other towns. And it wasn't like today where, it's very well planned exactly when you would return. But many times the master would go and he would receive his bride in the hometown of the woman to whom he was arranged. And what Jesus is saying is those servants would stay at the house. And the master would go and he would receive his bride, and there would be a wedding feast that many times would last 3 or 4 days. But the servants at home never knew exactly the moment when the master would come home. But the servant, when he comes home, was to have his lamp burning and to have all of his clothing on, all of his servants' clothing, so that the moment the master comes home, they're ready to do what? They're ready to serve. They're ready to do the job that they had been given by the master. My wife and I recently celebrated our 14th wedding anniversary a couple weeks ago. I've told you about that. And when I was planning for our wedding date, I planned this really romantic date. I thought it was, and kind of ended up being dorky. But anyway, I thought it was really cool. And I was going to take her to the Texans game. No, just kidding. And so we went out, and it reminded me of what we used to do for my parents when we were kids. Now, this is really dorky. How many of you remember the old oil lamps that are glass, and the oil would be in the bottom, and then the top would kind of be like this? What are they called? What is it? Hurricane lamps? Something like that, right? And you would turn the little knob and the wick would go up higher and the flame would be bigger. And so my mom and dad had one. It was an antique. And so when they would go out for their wedding anniversary, the kids, there were 4 of us, would all get together and we would clean the house for them. We'd get everything clean, and then usually Sam and Rodney would start fighting, and, Casey and I would start crying. And so anyway, we'd get it all cleaned up, and this is really dorky. And we just thought it was a big deal to put that oil lamp on their kitchen table, because normally it was just in their bedroom, We'd put that oil lamp on the table, and we would watch for them to come home. And when they would show up in the driveway, we'd strike a match and light that lamp up and then turn all the lights off so that when they came home, they would see that old-fashioned lamp burning on their table. I don't know why we did that. Well, we would stand there, and sometimes we'd put like a towel over our arm, and we would have like Cheerios for them when they came home. And we would talk in these really sophisticated accents like we were there to serve them. And I look back and I'm like, why did you put that stupid lamp on the table? It didn't have any significance. It wasn't like it was some, hand-me-down or been passed down for generations. It's just one that they bought somewhere. But I don't know why we did that particular thing, but I know why we were doing what we were doing. And that was this, that we knew when mom and dad left, they were eventually what? They were going to come home. And so when they came home, we didn't want them to find their house a total wreck. We just thought that when they came home, they would like that we had cleaned the house and we had a lamp on the table that was burning for some strange reason. And here's the thing, when my parents would go out of town, I wasn't that kid that you hear about, like you hear about it on the news. The parents go out of town, and so the kid calls all the friends together. They throw the big party, and they trash the parents' place. I mean, I just was never that kid. And I'm not saying that I'm better than anybody that wasn't that kid, but the reason that I wasn't is there was actually a fear that I had of my parents. Not that I was scared of them, that they would do something horrible to me, but I saw that the house that I was living in, it was not mine. It didn't belong to me. I wasn't working. I didn't pay for it. I wasn't paying taxes. It was theirs. The car that I drove, it wasn't mine. It was theirs. The house that I was living, the bed that I was sleeping in, it all belonged to them. And so it wasn't mine to do with as I saw fit. Jesus told his disciples, be dressed for action and have the lamps burning so that when the master comes, not if, when the master returns home, he will find you doing what he left you to do. Make no mistake about it. Look at verse 37. Blessed are those servants whom the master finds awake when he comes. Truly I say to you, he will dress himself for service and have them recline at table, and he will come and serve them. Notice the phrase, when he comes. It's not if, it's when. And then he uses the Greek word blessed. We have it blessed in English, and it's a word that means happy or fortunate. What is the master looking for when he returns? Answer that question. When the master returns from his wedding, what is he looking for? Look at verse 37. What is he looking for when he comes home? He's looking for servants who are awake. Other translations use the word watching. A few summers ago, we had some friends coming to stay with us for a week, and they live up in Michigan, and so we knew when they were coming. We didn't know exactly what time they would get there, but on the day that we were expecting them to arrive, I would sit in my office because we wanted to make sure the light was on. If it was dark outside, we wanted to make sure that when they showed up at the house that we were there to open the door and welcome them. They had just driven for 24 hours or whatever it was, and so we wanted to make sure everything was ready. We cleaned the house, we got the bed ready, and then we were sitting there and we were watching for them to come. Just like I did when my parents went out for their anniversary. We would sit there at the kitchen window and we would watch for the car to come home, waiting for them to come home so that we could show them all the things that we had done for them. Jesus said the servant that is happy or blessed is the servant that when the master returns home is awake. It's the servant who is ready for the master's return. When we were kids and we would put the oil lamp on the table, we did that because we knew that they were returning. We knew that they were eventually coming home, and we wanted them to be pleased with what we had done. So Jesus continues in verse 38. If he comes in the second watch or in the third and finds them awake, blessed are those servants. What I want you to see in that verse is the timing of the master's return is not what's important. And yet, we have a new movie coming out in just a couple weeks, Left Behind, the whole Left Behind series that sold millions of copies worldwide. It's about when Jesus Christ returns. And there are movies like Armageddon and other movies that talk about the end times and the book of Eli and all these movies that talk about this post-apocalyptic world and what will it look like. And people try to predict when it's going to happen. And remember a few years ago, the guy in California made the prediction that on a certain day Jesus was going to come back. And I was sitting there thinking, he's not coming back that day. Because Jesus said, no man knows the hour or the time. Anyone who ever tries to tell you they know when Jesus is coming back and they're asking you for an offering, don't give it. Because no one knows. Jesus himself is teaching here. And he says, when the master returns, it doesn't matter whether it's in the first watch or the second watch or the third watch of the night. Jesus didn't tell us when he's coming back because that's not our responsibility. Our responsibility is that when he returns, he finds us watching. He finds us ready. He finds the lamps burning and us doing the job that we have committed to do. What matters the most is that when the master returns, he finds us faithful. Did you notice there in verse 37 and verse 38 the word that is used to describe the servants who are watching? They're blessed. Because a faithful life is a blessed life. If you want a blessed life, a life that is happy and that you find joy and peace, God just expects you to be faithful. Just be faithful. A faithful life is a blessed life. Jesus continues his teaching in verse 39. But know this, that if the master of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have left his house to be broken into. You must also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. In our neighborhood over the last couple years, we've had some crimes. We've had some people have their houses broken into, and my car window was broken out because I left an iPad box in the back and it was empty. And they must have been really desperate to break into one of our cars. But anyway, I left the iPad box there, and it was really dumb. But I was reading, we have a little group, our neighborhood has a little group on Facebook. And so one night I was up late, and Leslie and the boys were already asleep, and I get a little I get a little antsy at night when I'm up by myself. Anybody else a kind of a scaredy cat like that? I just don't like the dark. Bad things happen in the dark, okay? Bad people come out in the dark, you know? I mean, I was a dork. I mean, I just have to admit, like in high school, like when I dropped my friends off after a night out, I'd be like, will one of you ride to my house and just stay the night with me? Because I didn't want to make that drive home in the dark. Okay, anyway, that's enough divulging that. So I was up one night and I thought, well, I'll look and see what's going on in the old Inverness subdivision. Huge mistake. Huge. This lady gets on, and she starts telling about her neighbor. Now listen to this, y'all. He hears something at his back door one night. He goes thinking it's one of the dogs, and he comes to his back door. So as I'm reading this, I'm sitting right by my back door, and there's a masked man at the door trying to get in his house. Panic. Immediately. I mean, I'm listening, and then, the AC turns on. I'm like, what's that? And then Luke comes to the stairwell overlooking our living room when he can't sleep. So, I can't sleep. And so all of a sudden there's this shadow appearing in the balcony. I'm like, what's that? And I'm freaking out about this whole thing. And it's like, what in the world is happening? Because, and I think about that when I think of this verse. If you knew when the thief was going to come, you'd be ready. I mean, if you knew that tonight was the night that someone was going to break into your house, you'd prepare yourself, right? And Jesus said, you will not know the moment that the master will return. But if you had known that moment, you would make yourself ready. So because you don't know that it could be at any moment, the first watch, the second watch, or the third watch, always be ready. Always be faithful as you live this life that God has blessed you with. Because when the master returns, he's looking for faithfulness. A faithful life is a blessed life. So Jesus tells the story, and then in verse 41, Peter asks for clarification. He says, now Jesus, is this parable for everybody, or are you just talking to us, your disciples? So Jesus answered in verse 42, who then is the faithful and wise, what's the word? Manager. Who is the faithful and wise manager whom his master will set over his household to give them their portion of food at the proper time? Blessed, there's that word again. Blessed is that servant whom his master will find so doing when he comes. There is such an important truth in verse 42. And if you capture one really vital truth for your life that you're living, it's what Jesus said in verse 42. It's really the question that he asks. Who is the faithful and wise, what's the word again? Manager. Not owner, the manager. Who is the faithful and the wise manager? Some translations of the Bible use the word steward there. And here's the important truth I want you to see. God owns everything. God owns it all. And that includes your life. Your life has been entrusted to you to be managed in the way that the owner of that life sees fit. God created you in His image. He gave you life. He sustains you. And Paul said that in Him we move and we live and we have our being. Your life is a sacred trust from God. So who is that faithful and wise manager who is managing his life and his resources and his time and his family in the way not that he sees fit, but that the owner sees fit? If you walk up to me and you give me $1,000 and you say, I want you to hold on to this for me, I'm going to come back for it. And I take that $1,000, can I use that $1,000 however I see fit? Why not? Because it's not mine. It belongs to the person who entrusted it to me. And it's the same with our lives. Paul said that we have been bought with a price. Therefore, we are to glorify God in our body and in our spirit because they belong to God. So who is that faithful and wise manager? You are to be faithful to manage your life according to the will of the one who owns it. So in verse 43, we see that main idea that a faithful life is a blessed life. And the blessings of a faithful life, they come in different forms. I want you to see in verse 44 that when we are faithful to God, God then entrusts us with greater responsibility. Verse 44, truly I say to you, he will set him over all his possessions. And then look at verse 48. Just the first part, he says, but the one who did not know and did what deserved a beating, he will receive a light. Oh, excuse me, I read the wrong part. The last part. Everyone to whom much was given, of him much will be required. And from him to whom they entrusted much, they will demand the more. Everyone to whom much is given, much will be demanded. When I was a kid, my dad owned a roofing company. That was really my first job after working really before I worked at the ballpark concession stand. And my dad, I'll never forget, when I started working with him, I was really young, probably 9 or 10. And so I went out on the job site with my dad, and we'd get out at the house at about 4:30 or 5 in the morning, and because you got to roof houses early because it gets hot in Houston. And my job when I was really little, Dad and then when they would get done with shingles and he would cut it with a knife, he would throw the shingles off the edge. And my job was to simply pick up the trash and put it in the trailer. They had a big flatbed trailer. And so my job was to just keep the job site clean. And they had a magnet that was on a string, and I would walk around and make sure all the nails were picked up. And that was my job every day. And I'll never forget the first day. I worked with him a couple of years when I was off in the summer from school. And then my dad said, all right, Robbie, now I'm going to let you start carrying shingles up to the roof. That was a big deal. Now, I couldn't carry the whole bundle because I was too small, but I would pull 2 or 3 shingles out at a time, and I bet you I'd make 300 trips up and down that ladder, but it didn't matter because what I saw was my dad was trusting me with something bigger. And then eventually, after I did that, and then I grew strong enough to be able to carry the entire bundle up to the roof and lay them out, then my dad started letting me lay out the shingles. So I would take the shingles and not just put them on the roof, but then I'd take them out of the package and I would line them up in the rows because he and Uncle Melvin would run the rows of shingles. And so my dad said, all right, I want you to start lining them out. And that was a big deal. But the first day my dad handed me a hammer, I mean, it was something else. But my dad would have never handed me the hammer if I didn't walk around the yard with that magnet picking up the nails. You see, to whom much is given, much is required. And he says that faithful servant that is awake when Jesus comes, when he comes, he will set you over all his possessions. God entrusts us with more and more responsibility as we prove to God that we are faithful in what he's given to us. If I'm not faithful with my 3 children, God knows I'm not going to be faithful with my 4th child, is he? If I'm not faithful with the first part of my money, God knows I'm not going to be faithful if I get more money. Do you see? To whom much is given, much is required. A faithful life is truly the blessed life. So greater responsibility is one of the blessings. God, if you are faithful in what he's given you, God will entrust more and more responsibility to you. More and more money, more and more people, more and more jobs, more and more parts of his kingdom work. But there's something else in verse 45 that I think is important. But if that servant says to himself, my master is delayed in coming, and begins to beat the male and female servants, and to eat and drink and get drunk, the master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and in an hour he does not know, and will cut him in pieces and put him with the unfaithful. And that servant, notice this, that servant who knew his master's will, but did not get ready to act according to his will receive a severe beating. But the one who did not know, and did what deserved a beating, will receive a light beating. Did you hear that? I think part of the reason Jesus doesn't tell us when he's coming back is because he knows many of us will wait into the last minute before we start serving him. And that's why so many people on their deathbed will say, I wish I had done more. Jesus said, you don't know when the time's coming. When the master comes and returns, or whether your life is going to end, what matters in that moment is that you have been faithful to what God has called you to do. Sometimes my parents would come home after their anniversary dinner, and they would find out that we had been fighting. And when we had been fighting and we had been doing things that we weren't supposed to do, there was discipline in our home. And I remember as a kid when, part of my motivation for some of the things I did was that when my mom and dad came home, I wanted to make sure they found me doing the right things and not the wrong things. If my parents had a rule that girls could not come into the house without mom and dad there, I would never invite a girl to my house without my parents there. And the reason was not because, I didn't like girls or anything like that, or I wasn't like any other guy. It was that when my parents came home, I would have never wanted them to find me breaking their rules. I never wanted them to find me being unfaithful to what they had asked me to do, because I knew there were consequences. And if mom and dad couldn't trust me with that rule, what made me think they were going to trust me with a car? What made me think that they were going to trust me with greater responsibility down the road? I think many of us, we kind of live this Christian life just kind of stuck. And the reason is we're just not being faithful in every area of our lives with the things that God has entrusted to us. Are you being faithful? A faithful life is a blessed life. Paul said, moreover, in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, moreover, it is required of stewards that they be found faithful. Our lives can bring lots of unexpected things. Unexpected kids, unexpected job loss, unexpected job opportunities, unexpected blessings, unexpected very difficult times. No matter what life deals you, know this, that with all the unexpected stuff that's circling around in the world, there is something you can be certain of. One day the Master will return. And what the Master's looking for is not what you've done with someone else's gifts, someone else's resources. God's going to be looking at your life, and He's going to be saying to you, were you faithful? Were you faithful with what I entrusted to you? There were some servants, Jesus told their story, and the Master entrusted various things to these servants. And the day came, the master returned, and the first one who had received 10, he said, look, Lord, I made you double. And the next one who had received just a couple, he made double that. And then one that had only received one talent, one thing, came to the Lord and he said, I hid it in a handkerchief, and I knew that you would require things, and I wanted to make sure that when you came back, that you found what you'd invested in me. And God said, the master said, you knew what kind of person I was. You knew what I was looking for. So why in the world would you take what I entrusted to you and do nothing with it? Wouldn't it be a tragedy at the end of our lives when we all stand before God, the master returns, and God says, Robbie, what did you do with the life that I entrusted to you? And I said, God, I blew it. I wasted it. I wasn't as faithful to you as you had called me to be. A faithful life is a blessed life. So I want to end today with just the question in verse 42 that Jesus asked. Who then is that faithful and wise manager? Who in this room is being faithful to steward your marriage the way that God has called you to steward it? How many of you are being faithful and wise with your thoughts that have been entrusted to you? Your mind that's been entrusted to you. Are you thinking on good things? Or are you spending your time thinking on foolish things? What about your kids? Are you being a faithful and wise steward of those precious children that God has given to you and trusted to you to take care of and to lead them to know Jesus? Who is that faithful and wise manager of your job? You realize that the job that you've been given by God is not given so that you can hoard up money for yourself. God has given you the job so that you might bring the healing embrace of the kingdom to this world. The street that you live on, the house that you live in, the friends that you have, God has placed you in their life. He has entrusted them to you, and He's saying to you, will you be faithful with that life that I have given and entrusted into your hands? A faithful life is a blessed life. So are you being a faithful father? Are you being a faithful mother? Are you being a faithful steward of the resources, the money that God has given to you? Are you being a faithful spouse? Are you being a faithful husband, a faithful wife? Are you being a faithful grandparent? Are you being a faithful friend? Are you being a faithful church member? Are you being that faithful and wise manager that Jesus has called us to be? Life is not a game. Life is to be lived. And we are to be ready at any moment for the certainty of the Master's return. And when He returns, may we all be found faithful. Amen? Let's pray together.